Catherine Harper woke in the dark, her breath clouding the air above her borrowed cot. The church vestry held no warmth this late in September. She dressed quickly, fingers stiff with cold, and lit the stub of candle she'd been rationing for 3 weeks. The town had promised a schoolhouse by autumn. What they'd delivered was broken lumber and excuses. The foundation posts still lay in the frost-covered grass where the mayor had abandoned them in July. She spread the borrowed slates across the front pews, arranged her precious primers on the altar rail, and waited for sunrise. When the first gray light touched the windows, she began writing the day's lessons in careful script. Samuel Brennan arrived with his children as the church bell struck 7. His daughter Emma carried her reader under one arm, walking with the serious dignity of a 10-year-old who knew her letters. His son Thomas, 7 and gap-toothed, clutched a slate against his chest like treasure. Samuel removed his hat inside the door. His eyes found Catherine's face, then moved to the thin blanket folded on her cot in the corner. The understanding that crossed his features made her look away. "Miss Harper," he said quietly. "Mr. Brennan, good morning. Emma, Thomas." The children took their places among the pews. Others arrived in 2s and 3s until 12 students filled the makeshift classroom. Catherine began the day's lessons with multiplication tables, her voice steady despite the cold that made her hands shake. Samuel lingered near the door. She felt his attention during the geography lesson. When Emma's face brightened at the mention of Boston Harbor, she felt it again during penmanship. When Thomas carefully formed his letters with tongue caught between his teeth. The morning passed in recitations and quiet industry. When the children broke for lunch, Samuel still hadn't left. Catherine found him outside, studying the abandoned schoolhouse materials. The posts had weathered badly. The lumber had warped. Whatever promise the town had made was rotting in the grass. "Papa!" Emma appeared at his elbow. "Where does Miss Catherine sleep when it gets truly cold?" Samuel's jaw tightened. He looked at his daughter, then at the church, then at Catherine standing in the doorway with her shawl pulled tight. "I don't know, sweetheart," he said. But Catherine saw the thought take root in his eyes. She saw him glance once more at the abandoned lumber, then at the sky where the first frost was already predicted. He settled his hat and gathered his children without another word. Catherine watched them walk toward the edge of town, toward the homestead she knew lay 3 miles west along the creek. Emma looked back once, her young face creased with worry. That night, the temperature dropped. Catherine added her spare dress to the blanket and slept in her coat. The candle burned down to nothing. Outside, the first frost came exactly as predicted, silver and merciless in the moonlight. She didn't sleep much. Neither, she suspected, did Samuel Brennan. Samuel walked his property that evening with deliberate steps. The sun dropped behind the western ridge, painting his timber stacks in shades of amber and shadow. 2 years of cured pine, sorted and ready. Enough to expand his barn before winter. Add the storage he'd needed since Margaret died. He'd planned this expansion for 3 winters. Practical. Necessary. The calves needed better shelter. The grain needed a dry place. A man planned for such things on the frontier. But Emma's question wouldn't leave him alone. He stopped before the straightest stack. The beams he'd been saving for the barn's main supports. The best pieces, the driest, wood that would hold true through the hardest weather. His hand rested on the top beam. Margaret would have known what to do. She'd been a teacher herself before she became his wife. She'd taught Emma her letters by lamplight, made Thomas count fence posts while they walked the property line. A frontier without schools is just wilderness with people in it, she used to say. Samuel stood among his timber until the stars came out. The barn could wait another year, maybe 2. Livestock were hardy. Grain could be covered. But a teacher couldn't educate from a sickbed. And those 12 children, including his own, deserved better than a freezing church vestry. The decision settled in his chest like a stone dropping into still water. He found Catherine after the next morning's lessons. The children had scattered for lunch. She was organizing primers on the altar rail, her movements precise despite the cold. "Miss Harper," he said, I'd like to speak with you. She turned, surprise evident in her eyes. Of course. I have timber, he said. Enough to build something small, a cabin, near the creek on my property. You could walk to town for teaching, have privacy, warmth. Catherine's hand went to her throat. Mr. Brennan, I couldn't possibly. My children need you healthy enough to teach, he interrupted. So do the others. This isn't charity. It's practical sense. The sacrifice is mine to make. His voice was firm but not unkind. The town promised you shelter. They failed. I won't. She studied his face for a long moment. He met her gaze steadily. This quiet man with calloused hands and eyes that had seen grief. The barn you planned to build, she said softly. Emma mentioned it last week. Can wait. And your livestock will manage. They always do. Catherine drew a slow breath. Behind her, through the church windows, the broken lumber of the town's broken promise lay rotting in the autumn sun. I accept, she said, with gratitude, Mr. Brennan, and on one condition. Ma'am, that you call me Catherine, at least when the children aren't listening. The corner of his mouth lifted, almost a smile. Samuel, she repeated. The name felt strange and right on her tongue. He nodded once, settled his hat, and left her standing among the primers and borrowed slates. Outside, October was arriving with its cool promise. Inside, Catherine felt something shift, like ice beginning to crack in a spring creek. Samuel marked the timber the next morning while Emma asked questions about her mother. The memory rose easily, no longer sharp with fresh grief but tender as an old scar. Mama taught me my letters, Emma said, running her hand along a smooth pine board. I remember the lamp. And her voice. She did. Samuel agreed. Every night. Even when she was tired. Thomas appeared from behind the timber stack. Did Mama teach you, Papa? Some. I can read simple things. Your mother was patient. Can Miss Catherine teach you more? Emma's eyes were bright with sudden hope. Samuel paused in his marking. The thought hadn't occurred to him, a man his age, learning letters like a child. But Margaret had always said education had no age limit. Maybe, he said, if she's willing. Emma smiled. It transformed her serious face into something luminous. Mama would like Miss Catherine. I believe she would. They worked in comfortable silence after that. Samuel showed Emma how to measure and mark, how to sight along a board for straightness. Thomas practiced counting the marked pieces, his small voice careful with the numbers. By afternoon, Samuel had selected the timber he'd need, the best pieces, the ones he'd saved for the barn's critical supports. Looking at them now, he felt no regret. Papa, Thomas said suddenly, will there be room for the new calf when we build your barn later? Samuel knelt to his son's level. The boy's face was earnest, worried about practical things the way children did. Some things matter more than storage, son, Samuel said gently. Your education matters. Having a teacher who's warm and healthy matters. Understanding that that's worth more than any barn. Thomas considered this with 7-year-old gravity. Because of learning. Because of learning. And because it's the right thing to do. Emma touched her father's shoulder. Like Mama would want. Exactly like Mama would want. That evening, Samuel told his children they'd help build the cabin. They'd learn carpentry alongside their letters. They'd understand that education required sacrifice, and that sacrifice for the right reasons was never wasted. Emma immediately grasped the significance. Her eyes shone with understanding that went beyond her years. Thomas asked if he could learn to mix daub for chinking. Samuel promised he could. October began with clear skies and purposeful work. Samuel felled the first tree at dawn, the axe biting clean through seasoned pine. Emma picked up a saw without being asked, her face serious with new understanding. Thomas asked if he could learn to measure. Samuel handed him the measuring cord and showed him how. The work had begun, not just building a cabin, but building something larger, a promise kept when others had failed, a teacher given shelter, children given the gift their mother had valued most. Margaret would have approved. Samuel felt certain of that as he swung the axe again, sending chips flying into the October morning. The cabin rose in steady increments through October's golden afternoons. Samuel worked with his children after morning lessons, teaching them carpentry while Catherine taught them letters. The rhythm felt right, balanced, purposeful. Emma learned to measure and cut with surprising precision. Her small hands grew confident with the saw. Her eye for straight lines inherited from her father. Thomas mixed daub with fierce concentration. His tongue caught between his teeth the way it did during arithmetic. Catherine brought them lunch most days. She'd arrive with bread and cheese wrapped in cloth, her cheeks pink from the walk. She began contributing ideas: a window facing east for morning light, a shelf specifically for books, proper chimney placement for best draw. "The smoke will eddy if you place it there," she said one afternoon, pointing to Samuel's original plan. "Better to offset it slightly." Samuel studied her suggestion. She was right. He adjusted the framing without comment, but noticed how her eyes brightened at being heard. The collaboration felt natural. They didn't speak of courtship or intention. They spoke of joists and chinking, of window sills and door clearances. But underneath ran something warmer, something that grew with each shared decision. "Mama used to say a house needs light from the east," Emma observed one day. "So you wake with the sun." Catherine smiled. "Your mother was wise. She was a teacher, like you." "Then I'm in excellent company." The community noticed but didn't help. They were absorbed in their own winter preparations, their own concerns. Samuel didn't judge them for it. A frontier taught you to tend your own first, by month's end. The cabin stood complete. One room, sturdy and square, with a fireplace Samuel built with particular care. He used the straightest timber for the frame, the driest boards for the roof. The pieces he'd been saving for the barn's main supports went into Catherine's walls without hesitation. The structure would hold. He'd made certain of it. Catherine stood in the doorway on moving day, her few possessions in a single trunk. Samuel had carried it from the church himself. Now she looked at the room, the east window, the bookshelf, the fireplace drawing perfectly, and her eyes filled. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "No thanks needed. You're teaching my children. That's payment enough. It's too generous. It's what's right." She turned to face him. In the autumn light, her features were fine and determined. A woman who'd come west alone seeking purpose. A woman brave enough to sleep in a church vestry rather than abandon her students. "Your wife would be proud of you." "Samuel," Catherine said quietly. His throat tightened. "I hope so." Emma and Thomas appeared in the doorway, arms full of firewood they'd gathered. They stacked it beside the hearth with elaborate care, making sure Catherine would be warm her first night. As the first hard cold arrived that evening, smoke rose from the cabin's chimney in a straight, clean line. Samuel checked it from his own porch 3 miles distant, nodded once in satisfaction, and went inside to feed his children supper. The cabin would hold. Catherine would be warm. And somewhere, he thought, Margaret was smiling. November settled in with frost and routine. Catherine taught in town during the day. Evenings, Samuel's children visited her cabin for additional lessons. They'd arrive at dusk, Emma carrying her advanced reader, Thomas with his slate. Catherine would have the fire built up, lamps lit, the small room warm and welcoming. They'd read aloud in turns, practice arithmetic, study geography from her precious maps. Samuel would arrive an hour later to walk them home. He'd linger in the doorway, listening to his daughter parse complex sentences, his son recite multiplication tables without hesitation. The children were thriving. not just in academics, but in confidence, in understanding that learning opened worlds beyond the frontier. One evening, Catherine asked them to wait outside while she spoke with their father. Emma raised an eyebrow but obeyed. Taking Thomas to skip stones in the creek despite the cold. They're doing remarkably well. Catherine said, Emma reads at a level beyond her years. Thomas has a gift for numbers. Credit to their teacher, Samuel said, and their father. You've taught them the value of education. Not every parent does. Samuel shifted his weight, uncomfortable with praise. Their mother did that. I'm just trying to honor her wishes. Catherine moved to her small table, selected a primer from the stack. The simplest one, meant for beginning readers. Samuel, she said carefully. When you read the measurements for the cabin, you asked Emma to verify them several times. When I wrote down the supply list, you asked me to read it aloud. His jaw tightened. She saw the pride war with honesty in his face. I can read simple things, he said finally. Signs. Short letters. But anything more than a few words, Margaret taught me basics. But I never had proper schooling. Would you like to? The question hung between them. Outside, the children's laughter carried across the creek. I'm a grown man, he said. Bit late for primers. Education has no age limit. Your wife told you that, didn't she? His eyes widened slightly. How did you know? Because it's what I tell every parent who says they're too old to learn. And because I imagine a woman who taught her children by lamplight would say exactly that. Samuel was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. I'd be grateful, he said. If you're willing. So began the evening lessons. After Emma and Thomas walked home, Samuel would return alone. He'd sit at Catherine's small table, his calloused finger following words in the primer. His brow furrowed in concentration. Catherine was patient. She never condescended, never made him feel foolish. When he stumbled over Massachusetts, she simply repeated it slowly, showed him how to break the word apart. When he laughed at his own pronunciation, she laughed with him. The intimacy of it surprised them both. His head bent close to hers over the page, her hand guiding his finger to keep his place. The quiet satisfaction when he completed a full paragraph without help. One evening, Emma appeared in the doorway unannounced. She'd come back for her forgotten scarf and found them bent over the primer together, firelight warm on their faces. She smiled, collected her scarf without a word, and left them to their lesson, walking home under stars. Emma slipped her hand into her father's. I like Miss Catherine. Papa, she said. I know, so do I. Do you like her like how you liked Mama? Samuel stopped walking. His daughter looked up at him with Margaret's intelligent eyes, waiting for honesty. I believe I do, he said carefully. Is that all right with you? Emma's smile was answer enough. Mama would like her too. I'm certain of it. They walked the rest of the way home in comfortable silence. Inside their house, Thomas was already asleep. Samuel checked on his son, then stood at the window looking toward the distant creek. He could just make out the lamp glow from Catherine's cabin. The light seemed warm against the November dark. December arrived with teeth. The cold snap came hard and early, settling in like an unwelcome guest who meant to stay. Temperatures dropped below zero and held there for days. Catherine's cabin held warmth beautifully. Samuel's careful construction and quality timber withstood the brutal weather without complaint. She wrote him a note of thanks, delivered by Emma, praising how well the chimney drew even in harsh wind. Samuel read the note 3 times, pleased his work had proven sound. Then his own roof began to fail. It started with a single drip during a savage storm, then 2 more. Then a steady pour in 3 places, water streaming through gaps that shouldn't exist. Samuel worked frantically with tar paper and spare boards, but the damage was spreading. He realized the truth with sinking certainty he'd used the best. Most weather-resistant timber for Catherine's cabin, the straightest beams, the driest boards, the pieces that would hold true under stress. What remained for his own roof repairs hadn't been adequate. The children moved into the main room by the fireplace. Their sleeping loft was too wet, too cold. Grain stores had to be shifted constantly to stay dry. Every pan and bucket in the house was positioned to catch drips. Samuel worked double repairing what he could, moving what he couldn't, trying to keep his children warm and fed. His clothes stayed damp. His sleep came in fitful hours. He told no one. Pride. Perhaps. Or not wanting Catherine to feel guilt for his choice. This was his decision, his sacrifice. He'd manage the consequences. But Emma saw. She watched her father wear the same damp shirt for 3 days. Watched him work himself to exhaustion, his face drawn with sleeplessness. Watched the house become a cold, wet struggle against the elements. One evening, she found him sitting by the fire after Thomas had fallen asleep. His shoulders sagged with weariness. "Papa," she said quietly, "you need to ask for help." "We'll manage, sweetheart." "We're not managing, you're barely sleeping. Everything's wet." Thomas coughed all night. "It'll pass. Weather always breaks eventually." "And if it doesn't?" Her voice carried an edge he rarely heard from her. "If you get sick, if Thomas gets worse, who teaches us then?" Samuel looked at his daughter. 10 years old and already carrying wisdom beyond her years. Margaret's daughter in every way that mattered. "What would you have me do?" he asked. "Tell Miss Catherine. Tell someone. You gave her shelter when she needed it. Let others do the same for you." "It's not the same thing." "Why? Because you're a man. Because you're supposed to manage alone." Emma's eyes flashed. "Mama wouldn't have wanted this. You know she wouldn't." The truth of it struck him silent. Margaret would have been furious to see him suffering in silence while their children lived in damp cold. "I used the good timber for her cabin," he said finally. "I made that choice. The consequences are mine." "The choice was noble. The suffering is foolish." Emma softened her tone. "Papa, please. If you won't ask for help, at least let me tell Miss Catherine the truth. She deserves to know." Samuel stared into the fire for a long time. Water dripped steadily into the bucket by his chair. Outside, the wind howled around the failing roof. "Tell her," he said at last. "If she asks, don't lie to protect my pride." Emma kissed his cheek and went to bed. Samuel sat by the fire until dawn, listening to water drip and wind blow, wondering if he'd traded too much for his principles. The weather broke slightly in January, the brutal freeze giving way to cold rain. During the town lesson, Catherine's church classroom developed a leak of its own. Water dripped onto the children's slates, forcing her to move the class twice. She looked up at the failing roof and made her decision. After class, she asked Emma to stay behind. The girl's face was serious as she approached the altar rail where Catherine stood. "Emma," Catherine said gently, "how is your home faring in this weather?" The girl's composure cracked just slightly. "Not well, Miss Catherine. Tell me the truth. Please. I need to know." So Emma told her. The leaking roof, the damaged grain, the damp clothes, her father's exhaustion. She described it simply, without drama. But Catherine heard the worry underneath each word. "He used the best timber for your cabin," Emma finished. "What was left wasn't enough for proper repairs. He won't accept help? Won't even mention it?" Catherine's chest tightened. The cabin that kept her so warm, so safe, it had come at this cost. Samuel's children were living in cold and damp while she slept comfortable. The knowledge settled like a stone in her stomach. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "You did right, Emma, that evening." Catherine walked to Samuel's home uninvited. She'd never been inside before. The sight that greeted her made her breath catch. Water stains darkened the ceiling. Buckets were positioned throughout the room, catching steady drips. The children's bedding was piled by the fireplace. Everything had the damp, cold feel of a losing battle against the elements. Samuel looked up from his repairs, surprise evident on his face. "Catherine, I wasn't expecting..." I know, she said, stepping inside. Emma told me. His jaw tightened. She shouldn't have troubled you. She should have. I should have known sooner. Catherine looked around the room, seeing the full extent of the damage. Samuel, this isn't right. You gave me shelter and sacrificed your own. I made a choice, a noble one, but your children are suffering for it. My children are learning, he said firmly. Thomas reads now. Real sentences, not just simple words. Emma ciphers better than I ever will. They built something with their own hands and understood why it mattered. They learned that education matters more than comfort, that sacrifice for the right reasons is never wasted. He stood straighter, meeting her eyes. That's worth a leaking roof. Catherine, that's worth being cold and damp for a season. They'll remember this lesson longer than they'll remember the discomfort. The conviction in his voice was absolute. This wasn't a man regretting his choice. This was a man who believed, bone deep, in what he'd done. And what about you? Catherine asked softly. What about when you're too exhausted to work, too sick to care for them? His shoulders sagged slightly. I'll manage. You're already past managing. Look at you. When did you last sleep through a night? When did you last wear dry clothes? Samuel was quiet. Water dripped into a nearby bucket. Marking time. I'm going to tell the community, Catherine said. Tomorrow after services, if they won't respond to broken promises, perhaps they'll respond to a neighbor's sacrifice. Catherine, no. Her voice was gentle but immovable. You gave when you had little to give. You taught your children the value of education through action, but you also taught them to suffer in silence, and that's not a lesson they need. Let the community help. Let them see what one man's choice has cost. Let them make it right. Samuel looked at her for a long moment. His face was drawn with exhaustion, his eyes shadowed. But something in Catherine's expression, the determined set of her jaw, the teacher's authority she carried, made him relent. Do what you think right, he said finally. I will. She left him to his repairs and walked back through the rain to her warm cabin. That night, she didn't sleep. She kept thinking of the dry, solid roof above her head and the price Samuel had paid to build it. Sunday services were sparsely attended, the weather keeping many home. But enough families gathered that Catherine had her audience. She waited until after the final hymn, then stood at the front of the church. I need to speak with you all, she said, about the schoolhouse and about sacrifice. The families stilled, surprised by her directness. Catherine met their eyes steadily. You promised me a schoolhouse. Those materials are still rotting outside. I've slept in this vestry since September, taught your children from borrowed pews. She paused. One man, one family, didn't accept that as good enough. Samuel Brennan built me a cabin from his own timber. Timber he'd been saving for 2 years to expand his barn. Murmurs rippled through the small crowd. Some looked embarrassed, others defensive. That cabin stands solid. It's kept me warm through the hardest winter I've known. I've taught your children well because I've had shelter. Catherine's voice remained calm but carried weight. What you should know is that Samuel's roof is failing. He used the best timber for my cabin. His children are living in damp and cold. He's exhausted himself trying to manage alone. The mayor shifted uncomfortably. We've all got our own concerns. One man made education his concern. Catherine interrupted. One man put your children's future above his own comfort. He's taught his children more about community and sacrifice than I could ever teach from a book, and he's paying for it every night when he tries to sleep in a house that's falling apart around him. Shame settled over the gathering like heavy snow. The blacksmith was the first to speak. Barn raising, he said gruffly. Saturday, we build it right this time. Samuel's roof first, then the schoolhouse. Others nodded, agreement spreading. The mayor cleared his throat. I'll bring the lumber we ordered. It's been sitting in my shed all winter. By the time Catherine left the church, The plan was set. Saturday. Frontier tradition at its finest. A community rallying to repair what one man's generosity had broken. Saturday arrived cold but clear. Families appeared at Samuel's homestead at dawn, bringing timber, tools, and determination. The blacksmith organized the roof work. The carpenter led the framing teams. Women brought food. Children carried supplies. Samuel stood speechless as his neighbors swarmed his property with purpose. The blacksmith gripped his shoulder hard. "You showed us what matters," he said. Time we remembered. By noon, Samuel's roof was sound. Good materials, properly installed, built to last. The workers moved to the schoolhouse site, raising the framework they should have completed months ago. Catherine gathered the children outside, turning the barn raising into a mathematics lesson. She had them calculate board feet, measure angles, understand load distribution. Learning and community, intertwined. Emma and Thomas glowed with pride, watching their father honored, their sacrifice recognized and redeemed. By sunset, Samuel's roof was complete, and the schoolhouse stood framed against the winter sky. The community shared a meal, adults talking quietly, children playing despite the cold. Samuel found Catherine by the creek, watching the last light fade over their settlement. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for speaking up. Thank you for showing me what this community could be." She turned to face him. "I learned something important, Samuel. The strongest structures are built together. You taught me that." Their eyes met. In the growing dusk, something shifted between them, a recognition of what had been building since October. "Would you like to continue the reading lessons?" Samuel asked. "And perhaps, sometimes, just talk about things beyond primers and timber." Catherine's smile was soft and genuine. "I'd like that very much." They stood together watching stars emerge, the sound of community and construction fading behind them. Something new was beginning, something neither had planned but both recognized. Winter still held the land, but spring was coming. March brought thaw. The creek ran high and loud with snowmelt. The schoolhouse completed its transformation from framework to finished building, complete with proper desks Samuel and others had built. A real stove. Shelves for Catherine's books. She taught there now, officially. The town's first permanent teacher with a real classroom. The children thrived in the space, spread out at individual desks, warm and focused. But some evenings, Catherine still walked to the cabin by the creek. Samuel's children still visited for additional lessons. And Samuel himself came for reading practice that had evolved into something more. They talked about books now, and about the settlement's future, about education's role in building civilization, and about the children they were teaching together. Emma and Thomas had become half hers in the way that mattered not through law, but through affection and daily care. The courtship was understood, accepted, quietly celebrated. Samuel brought her firewood without being asked. Catherine mended his children's clothes and helped Emma with her advanced reading. Small acts that spoke of partnership forming. One April evening, Samuel arrived to find his children already there, bent over a geography lesson. Catherine looked up as he entered, her face bright with something she wanted to share. "Emma has something for you," she said. His daughter stood, holding a piece of paper with elaborate care. "For the end of term," she said, "we're supposed to draw what we learned." Samuel took the paper. It was a family portrait, drawn in careful detail. 3 figures stood before a cabin, a man, a woman, a boy. The creek flowed behind them, spring full and bright. Through the windows Emma had drawn, books lined every visible shelf. The detail was remarkable. The accuracy of the cabin's proportions, the way Catherine's hair caught light, the pride in the boy's stance. But what struck Samuel most was the simple fact of it. 3 figures. One home. His daughter had drawn not what was, but what would be. What was already becoming. "She's quite an artist," Catherine said softly, standing beside him to look at the drawing. Samuel couldn't speak past the tightness in his throat. Emma watched him with Margaret's intelligent eyes, waiting. "It's perfect," he managed finally. "Absolutely perfect." "Can Miss Catherine keep it?" Emma asked. "For her cabin." "If she'd like it." Catherine took the drawing with gentle reverence. "I'd be honored." She looked at Samuel, and the promise in her eyes was clear. "I'll hang it right here, where I can see it every day." That evening, after Emma and Thomas walked home, Samuel stayed. He and Catherine stood together in the cabin doorway, watching the settlement come alive with spring. Gardens being planted, the schoolhouse bell that now rang at proper hours, children's voices carrying across the greening grass. "Your wife would be proud," Catherine said quietly. "Of the children you're raising, of what you've built here." "I hope so." Samuel paused, gathering courage. "She'd like you, Catherine. I'm certain of that." "I wish I could have known her." "In some ways, I think you do, through Emma, through the values she left behind." Catherine turned to look at him in the lamplight. Her face was thoughtful and tender. "And what about you? Samuel, what do you think?" He took her hand, calloused fingers gentle around hers. "I think I'm grateful the town broke their promise. I think I'm grateful you needed shelter. And I think—" He stopped, smiled. "I think some things are worth more than storage. Some things are worth every piece of good timber a man has." "Education?" she asked. "Education," he agreed. "And this, whatever this is becoming. A family," Catherine said simply. "We're becoming a family." Outside, the April twilight deepened into night. The settlement was changing, growing into something more permanent. Inside the cabin by the creek, lamplight glowed warm against the darkness. On the wall, Emma's drawing hung in a place of honor. 3 figures. 1 home. Books on every shelf. And a spring creek flowing eternal behind them. A portrait of future made present. A family built on sacrifice and the deep belief that education mattered more than comfort. That some gifts were worth any cost. That the strongest structures, homes, communities, hearts were built together, with good timber and better intentions, meant to last.